Together we are but first coffee. Susie's just our host, but what matters most is we are a team. Together we are all safe here, and so are you. Among friends and mods we are safe. We talk about trauma, break down drama of life, death, happy or sad, even mad. We discuss it all here. Together we will thrive, not just survive. We will dry each other's tears, celebrate big or small wins, and chase away the fears. Together we fight cults or fight addictions. If not with experience, with love, and we don't judge. Please understand, this is a safe place to land. Please understand, you're not alone. This is a safe place to land. Together we thrive, not just survive. We will dry each other's tears, celebrate big or small wins, and chase away the fears. Because we are but first coffee, and Susie welcomes us all here. Together we are but first coffee, and Susie.
Well, I had myself on the screen and then I guess I knocked myself off the screen somehow. So I hope everybody's doing good. We got a few people coming in. I think tonight might be a little slow. It has been a big YouTube day. There's been a lot that's been going on, a lot of lives and stuff, which is great. I'm thrilled. I The more the better, right? The more the better. I see John came into the back office. Thank you, John. Thank you so much for being here. So much help. Ben's here. Thank you so much, Ben, for being a mod and just a friend in general. So, yeah. So, Indigo, it is also very good to see you. And yeah, these cases are tragic, and I hope that this one can get more exposure too. Absolutely. And maybe, just maybe, I think as you go on with the story tonight, you'll see that the um the chances that they're gonna get justice are pretty slim. But maybe in some way they did. So, you know, if you're a believer like I'm a believer, then yeah, they got justice. So I am gonna go ahead and get started. Hey, thanks, Left Jehovah's Witnesses, for being here. Comment if it's sad to see her emotional. Or am I emotional? I'm very emotional on this one. So I don't know if you're talking about me or not, but yeah. Yeah, Marilyn's live. Yeah, her too. It was sad. Anyway, Maria says eventually I catch a live 2 a.m. in Greece. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I was about to say before I read what you said, I was going to say, isn't she from Greece? I'm pretty sure. So thank you for being here. The kick in the butt is, y'all, I'm actually going to have one after this one. I've got another live set for 8 o'clock my time. So 8 Central. So right after this one, did she talk with Dodge? Okay. I know that she talked about him, but I haven't been on. I've been working on mine ever since the one that she did earlier. So I'll go watch it though. So, yeah, I figured it was you, Vernon. Good to see you, as always. It really is. So, yeah, thanks, Ben, for showing the one for landscape mode. It is easier, I think, for most, but it does put us out to more viewers, and a lot of these lives that I think are really important. I really want as many people as we can get to see them. So that's why I stream to both ways, horizontal and vertical. So, Florence, good to see you too. Hello. I hope everybody's coming in, and if not, then they can catch it on the replay, right? I am gonna tell you that this video, this live, I really intended for it to be a pre-recorded video, so I actually wrote pretty much a script, and so you're probably gonna hear some rustling of papers, but I got so busy this week that I didn't get this one pre-recorded, and so, I did get a big portion of it memorized, but, I get nervous when I'm talking about stuff that I don't wanna mess up any details on. So if you'll just kind of, give me a little grace if you hear the papers rustling around a little bit, or if you see me reading something, it's because I don't wanna mess it up. And if that bothers you to see me read it, just, like, play solitaire or something and just listen to me in the background. So then you won't know, right? Other than an occasional paper rustling here or there. So, a quick note before we start, this case does involve the essay and unaliving of 3 children. And of course, I'm going to avoid completely the more graphic details, and we're here to honor the victims. And in doing that, I want to stick to the verified facts. And I want to talk a little bit about how a case like this one, who to so many seemed like pretty much an open and shut case, how it can go all these years and never have truly been solved, even when so many people have very strong opinions on who did it. So, as with any topic that is heavy, I ask you to please take care of yourself. There is no shame in needing to walk away from a subject, and I promise I am going to try to keep it, as the least triggering as I can, but if you need to walk away, please do that. I absolutely understand, and I sometimes I have to do that too. So, okay, let's get started, y'all. So on June 13th of 1977, at Camp Scott, which was a Girl Scouts camp that was located near Locust Grove, Oklahoma, which is not too far from where I live, actually. I just went through Locust Grove just a few weeks ago, in fact. Um, but this camp was opening for its 49th year or season. Turns out it would be the season that didn't happen. It would actually be the last time that this camp even attempted to open. So at some point during the night, they think after midnight, but there's no way to know. But some point during the night of the 12th, 3 young campers would be absolutely brutally unalived in or near their tent. Their tiny little bodies would be discovered by a counselor the next morning, and thus began the horror and a tragedy and a mystery that has never 100% been solved. Now, before that horrifying night in June of '77, Camp Scott was an absolutely magical place for brownies and Girl Scouts to go. It had everything that anybody could possibly want in a summer camp. It had fishing and hiking and swimming and boating, like canoes and that kind of thing. And it had been that for generations of brownies and Girl Scouts since 1928. And Camp Scott was 410 acres of just absolutely beautiful woodlands with a, creek and a pond and all of this running through it. And the road, y'all, that led to this camp was called Cookie Trail Road after the Girl Scout cookies that they sell. And this Cookie Trail Road meandered through the woods and up to this campgrounds and to, I think it was 10 different sites, different tents scattered amongst the woods there. And I mean, by all accounts, it was gorgeous and so fun. And, daughters and moms and grandmothers had all attended this camp and worked at this camp. And the campers were actually allowed to pick what they called their camp buddies. And that just meant that, who you had in your camp or in your tent were actually people that you knew and that you already liked and felt safe with and all that. And each tent would house up to 4 girls. Now, these tents, as they call them, were actually a wooden raised base. It was like a platform that's set up off the ground, wood, and it had a a frame, a wood frame. And then they had that really thick, like army canvas that was draped down over this frame. And again, each of those tents held 2 sets of bunk beds, and the bunk beds had, fairly nice mattresses on them. So it was not like, you know, you weren't sleeping on the floor kind of a situation. It was pretty nice. Now, what there weren't in these tents were lights. So it got very dark at night because the only lights that they had were their flashlights. And the only lights that were in this camp were the kerosene lanterns that were hung outside of the restrooms or latrines, as they would call them. And I think there were some in where they ate in the kitchen area, but not in the tents or even the trails. And as it turned out, that would just make the crime a whole lot easier for this guy. So, the tent that these 3 girls were in was tent number 8, and they were in the Kiowa area. Each little area and each tent had its own name. Most were, Indian names because we're in Oklahoma, y'all. And if you've been here, everything is an Indian name, an American Indian, Native American, whatever you wanna call it. Here, we they call themselves Indians, so if I say Indian, I promise you, they're not gonna think that I'm being rude. That's what they we have Indian casinos and, all this stuff. So, anyway, so this tent number 8 was actually the furthest tent away from the counselor's tent, and it was to be the home of 3 girls: Lori Lee Farmer, age 8, Michelle Goose, age 9, and Doris Denise Miller, age 10. Now, I would like just quickly, so you know who we're talking about. I just have 2 different pictures that I wanna show you. This one, this is these girls. Look at those precious, innocent angels. And on the day of their murders, the girls, they were all 3 of these girls and several others were from a suburb of Tulsa called Broken Arrow. And they had all boarded a bus in Tulsa and made the 40-mile trek to Locust Grove or near Locust Grove to this Camp Scott. and it was meant to be a 2-week stay. So, and this was the first time that many had ever been away from their parents, and they were excited, and I'm sure I think back at myself as that age, and I would have been so excited and also terrified. And I actually did go when I was this age, I did actually go to a camp much like this one but I was in California. And, I oh, when I was studying all this, I kept imagining myself in these young girls, all of them, not just these 3, but in their positions. So anyway, somewhere near midnight or after, right after they think, on June 13th, which was supposed to be the day that camp actually began, a camp counselor named Carla Wilhite heard some sort of a weird, like, she described it as guttural sound in the dark, in the absolute silence of this camp. But when she didn't find anything amiss, she returned to her bunk, and then the next morning, as she was on her way to the showers, she discovered these bodies of the 3 girls. They had been pulled from their tents, beaten, strangled, essayed, and left dead. 2 of those precious babies were actually stuffed into their sleeping bags, and the 3rd was left partially dressed down the trail just a little bit. And no one could have known, not really, that the horrific event was going to occur. But there had been ominous signs, warning signs that everything wasn't quite right at Camp Scott. First of all, weeks before the camp had reopened for the season, the counselors were already there and they were going through all this training, and how to do this and how to do that, who was going to cook, who was, everything that they would need to know to take care of 140 little girls. So all 30 of the counselors were there. Well, they weren't all counselors. Well, they were all counselors, but some of them also cooked. So, but anyway, they were all there. And while they were out on a training session, somebody had broken into one of the counselor tents and just ransacked it, just absolutely tore it apart. And they left behind an empty donut box that had a note in it. And the note said that 3 campers from one tent were going to be murdered. But the note was believed to be just a prank, a hoax. It wasn't taken seriously. And so they threw it away. And then a week before the camp was to open, there was a local rancher that lived, he lived nearby, and his house was broken into while he was out tending to his animals. And, it was kind of ransacked and a lot of stuff was stolen, weird things were stolen. And it turned out later that some of the items that were stolen from this rancher's home were used in the crime. But that night when Carla Wilhite was startled awake, she didn't just blow it off. She did get up and she woke up another counselor named Dee Elder that was also in her tent. And she said, Did you hear a strange sound? I think I heard something, but Elder said, "No, I'm sorry. I didn't hear anything. I was asleep." And but Wilhite still wasn't completely comfortable with it. So she took her flashlight and she went outside, which is so scary, right? And she did look around, and she heard the sound again. But when she turned her flashlight toward where the sounds were coming from, the noises stopped, and she stood there, and she didn't hear anything else. So she walked past the tents, and everything seemed fine. She couldn't tell that anything was wrong. It looked like everybody was accounted for, there was nobody awake and getting into mischief or anything. And I do wanna say that in Oklahoma, y'all, we have a lot of wild animals, and included in that are big cats. We have bobcats, mountain lions, panthers. We even have bears, and in some parts of the country, we have alligators. I mean, it not there, but in some parts. So we have kind of sadly become accustomed to hearing an awful lot of weird, scary sounds in the night. So I'm sure that that's what this counselor thought. You know, clearly she cared enough to look, right? But panthers, they sound like a crying baby. Some of the other cats can sound like somebody screaming. And I've heard it too. And even though it's chilling, you kind of just chalk it up to a big cat. But then later, you know, that next day and beyond, some of the campers, some of these little girls, they would say that they saw strange lights or heard strange noises. And one little girl even said that she heard some girl crying for her mom. But none of those warnings were enough to save Lori, Michelle, or Denise. Sorry, guys. And after the bodies of these little girls were discovered, the camp directors, Richard and Barbara Day, they immediately alerted the highway patrol, and law enforcement officers just flooded into this camp. And they said that, a lot of these law enforcement officers were long-term cops. They had seen some stuff. They were, hardened by what they had seen, but that they were also fathers or uncles, and that so many of them were just moved to tears. One officer that was working the scene later said that working that scene was like being in church, that all the officers, without anyone saying anything, just spoke in whispers, and they just gathered evidence. They There was no, you know, calling back and forth to each other. It was all so reverent and I'm sure just crazy emotional. And the evidence that they gathered pointed to Lori and Michelle being struck and killed while they were still in their tent, and that Denise had been taken out into the woods where she was killed. There was blood on the wooden floor of their tent, and the killer attempted to wipe that up with a towel and a mattress cover, but, he couldn't get it all up. And then those bloody rags were actually stuffed into the sleeping bags that he then stuffed their bodies into. Now, that next morning, after the police got there and everything, the rest of the campers were very quickly put on buses and sent back to Tulsa where their parents would pick them up. Now, they didn't know what was going on. They had, they hid that from them. They just kept them away from the scene and got them on buses. But the parents had been told that 3 of the campers had been killed, but they didn't release the names of who had actually been killed. So those parents would go to meet those buses, and that they were just praying that their daughter would step off of one of those buses. And for 3 families, their daughters didn't. And y'all, I understand, this is decades ago, and sometimes it's easy to kind of forget about things that happened decades ago. But for me, I when I started trying to figure out what case I was going to cover this week, this one just kept standing out because I am the age that these little girls were. I could have been at that camp. I was at one pretty much like it in California, just as wooded, just as dark, just as scary, and just as great. And all I can think of is seeing my parents waiting, begging God to let me get off of that bus. So, those of us that are parents or aunts and uncles or whatever, can you even just imagine what that had to have been like? It also reminds me of the recent floods in Texas when any kind of modern communication was just washed away with those floodwaters. And these parents had to stand and wait and pray that their children would get off of military buses and military trucks. I cannot imagine. Now, items that had been stolen from Camp Scott, both in that ransacking of the counselor's tent and then from the girls' tent, some of those items were found in a nearby cave. And along with some photos and other evidence that eventually led investigators to name Gene Leroy Hart as their prime suspect. Now, Hart, he had a long history of convictions that included burglary, rape, and even kidnapping. He had been to prison and had been paroled in 1969, just a few years, 8 years before this happened. And then almost immediately after his parole, he was tried again in Tulsa and sent right back to prison because he just wouldn't stop committing crimes. And that time he was actually sentenced to 50 years in prison. But a few years before this murder, he escaped from prison and vanished. Just gone. Now Hart, he was Native American, he was Cherokee, and he had been born and raised in those woods around Locust Grove, just y'all country kids, they're all over the place in these woods and caves and everything. And he was no exception. He was absolutely, you know, knew those woods like the back of his hand. And he was also a very prolific camper who knew how to survive in very primitive conditions for a very long time. And they just always kind of knew that he was out there somewhere. unless he died in the cold or something. But they kinda knew he was out there. But it was discovered that Hart was hiding out in the Cookson Hills region, which is where this camp was. But he managed to still, even though they kinda knew he was there and they were searching constantly, he still managed to avoid capture for about 10 months after this murder. But then he was found and he was brought to trial. And this crazy thing is that when he was brought to trial, even with his history and his many convictions, a lot of his family, but not only family, a lot of the people that lived in the area supported him. They raised money, a lot of money. I forgot to write down the amount, but they raised a lot of money for his defense, and they showed up for that trial to show support for this man. And they knew his history, and he was a rapist and a kidnapper, and he was known for being extremely violent. And there was evidence that linked him to being close to that camp. But nothing at the actual murder scene could directly tie him to it. His trial took place in Pryor, Oklahoma, because Locust Grove, I don't even know if they have a courthouse, but Pryor would probably be the county seat. And it took place in March and April of 1979. But the jury, they couldn't find conclusive evidence linking him to the murders. So he was acquitted. Now, a lot of the members of the jury spoke to the media and did a lot of talking and said that they didn't really think he was innocent, but that the prosecution had failed to give them enough evidence that they could convict him without a reasonable doubt. But he was returned to prison because he had to finish out that 50-year sentence, and he also had more time added on because of escaping. And 2 months after he was returned to prison, he died of a heart attack. Now, over the years, technology has vastly improved. And the evidence that was collected at the scene has been tested and retested multiple times throughout the years. But they always come back inconclusive, and they say now that at this point that it's unlikely that it'll ever point to any one person. And there has never been another suspect named. It was always just this Hart guy. And the authorities say that the crime is very unlikely to ever really truly be solved officially. But most people think it's him, especially since there was never even another potential suspect. So after that, no Girl Scouts ever again walked those trails or slept in those tents at Camp Scott. It never reopened after the murders and was literally abandoned, and it still sits there. Anything that those campers didn't take with them, unless it's been drug away by animals, it's still there. And it just stands as an eerie reminder of the stolen lives of 3 innocent little girls. Now, in the early 1980s, families of 2 of the victims filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the local Girl Scouts Council and its insurer, but the jury ultimately found no negligence on the part of the Girl Scouts Council. And Richard and Barbara Day, who were the owners and directors of the camp, were never criminally charged, but they faced intense public scrutiny over things like the donut box that had the warning in it that was just discarded because they thought it was a joke, you know, or the decision not to add security or to even contact law enforcement after that donut box with that note was found. And also for the layout and just the relative isolation of certain tents, including that particular tent. What was actually, I thought, kind of bizarre was that they actually were kind of treated worse than he was. And I don't understand that. I'll never understand that. I mean, I understand them being under scrutiny, but to treat probably the murderer, who is already a known, you know, rapist and kidnapper and a violent, horrible human being, to treat him better, I'll never understand that. Now, Richard Day, he died in the 90s. And his wife, she just continued to keep a really low profile until her death. And they said that they just both just kind of went into hiding, that it was awful. They were gutted, basically, by this experience. They had only ever wanted the best, and the very worst had happened. And y'all, on these kind of lives, we talk about the victims and the perpetrators, and of course, that's what we need to talk about. But there were also other lives that were completely changed that morning. And as I kept studying this and trying to figure out how I wanted to present it, I just kept thinking about that young woman. I wonder if she's ever gotten the sound, that guttural noise that she heard. I wonder if she's ever been able to not hear it, if she's ever been able to not picture those girls and to forgive herself. And I absolutely pray that she found healing because they were just young too. These counselors were just, teenagers or early 20s. They were just young. And I want to thank you all for being here. I know I didn't approach the chat. I'm going to now, but I hope that you will join us each week. I plan to bring another unsolved crime. And if there's a crime that you all want me to cover, please let me know because, I don't hear about everything. I started out with this one because, it's in Oklahoma and I'm from Oklahoma. So it hit home and the girls being the same age that I am, or they would have been my age. So, and I just want to say, I want you all to just please stay happy, healthy, and safe and keep your children safe. Hug those babies. And none of the drama and the hate that we get our stomachs full of every day is worth it. We need to always remember what's worth it, and that is love and children. And I hope if that man is the one that murdered those babies, then I absolutely pray to God that there's a hell, and I hope he's burning there for eternity. I don't think there could be a worse crime than to essay and beat children to death. So, I'm gonna check with my chat. Thank you guys. This was a hard one, but I really think that it's important. I do have some starred comments. I'm gonna check those first, and then we will go from there. AB, thank you, AB, for being here. Yeah, they were just precious babies. Absolutely. It just I looked at their pictures and, you know, it they look like little girls that they look like little girls that I knew, you know, that I went to school with. I mean, they weren't, but that's what they looked like. I mean, that's what I would have looked like then. And let's see here. It is heartbreaking. AB says it is heartbreaking. They were babies, 8, 9, and 10. I can't imagine. It's a thing of nightmares. It absolutely is. She also says, yeah, I didn't have alligators in Oklahoma being on my bingo card this evening. Yeah, but we do. We do. Um, yeah, there's a lot of very swampy areas, and if you go down more to the south parts of and the east of us, southeastern parts of Oklahoma, it really is. We we have a little bit of everything, yeah, and a whole lot of others. I never thought we'd see bears, but we have bears now. I mean, I was always like, "Oh, we'll never have bears," but yeah, there's bears. It's weird. Yeah, no justice for those poor families and the tragedy on top of tragedy. I know. That is the tragedy on top of this tragedy. It is just like, I don't know if it would have given me any peace that he died. You know, I don't I kind of feel like it wouldn't have given me any peace. Like I would be glad that he couldn't escape again and hurt somebody else, but I don't know that him just simply dying could do it, could give me peace. Oh, I do have a photo of him. This is when they caught him. So, ugh, piece of shit. AB says, this is tricky because sadly, and while hard, that is what our jury is supposed to do according to the rules of the law, and the judge issues them before deliberating without reasonable doubt. Super hard. Absolutely. Yeah, I just have never wanted to be on a jury because it would absolutely kill me to let somebody get off that I really believed was guilty, but there just wasn't hard evidence of it. It's hard to see children go without justice. There's no justice in that, not for the families, gut wrenching all the way around. It sure is. Isn't that awful? Whoops. Hey, Trista. Good to see you. Says, hey, Susie, I'm not familiar with this case. I'll have to go back and watch. I just got here and look into it more. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I had always heard of it because I live in Oklahoma and I was a Girl Scout and a Brownie. So you hear about those things. And, but I really didn't I really didn't fully grasp the horror of it until I started really looking into it the last week. And I left out a lot of details just because we don't have to hear and certainly not see the details to know that it's horrible. And I just thought that it was more respectful to those little girls and to any family members if we didn't show that. But it's out there, if anybody wants to dig. Oops. Yeah. Hug the ones you love and keep the ones you love closer. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm gonna look down through here real quick. If y'all have any more, have any questions or comments, feel free to put them and we will try to get to those. I have a few minutes before I'm gonna go and run to the bathroom and get ready for the next one. So I just want to thank everybody that's been here. Jan, thank you so much for being here too. I'm trying to see where I kind of left off. Is it Arioki? Arioki? 67. Good to see you. Um, Thank you again, John, for being here. AB, it's always so good to have you here. Maria. Just trying to make sure I didn't miss anybody. I hate missing people. I want everybody to feel welcome. And I know that yeah, if you want to know more, Kristen Chenoweth did do a special on this case on Hulu. She absolutely did. And I was going to mention that and forgot. So thank you. See those mods, they just come in and save me. Whoops. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, they did go through a trial, but they didn't have to go through another one. He was, they went through trial and then he was let go. Well, not let go because he had to go back to jail, but he was acquitted. So, but at least they didn't have to go through another trial with another person, which there was never anybody else. Hey, Jean Moreno. Good to see you. Hi, Susie. Oh, thank you for this. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it was a tough one, guys. It was a tough one. But those are the important ones. And especially when they involve children, I think that they are extremely important that we look into these again and that we honor the children and their parents, especially when they didn't get any real justice, that I think that, my sister, now she was not murdered, but my sister died when she was 24 and my parents and myself and my brother and all of us, it honors her and it honors us when people mention her and they tell us things about her that they knew, the her that they knew and they just remembered that she lived and that she mattered and everything. And it honors us. And I think that a lot of you that have lost people, because I'm certainly not the only one, we have all lost people. And John, I know that you lost a daughter and I think that it probably honors you when people remember that daughter. And so that's why I wanted to do this one. Not to sensationalize it, but to honor those little girls and their families, their parents, their siblings, because they didn't really get justice, but we can honor them. And whenever, before I go to bed tonight, I'm going to light a candle for them I have every night this week. I've lit a candle for them, and I want to for sure do it tonight. And if you all, feel inclined to do that or just to hold them in some kind of light, you know, they're in a better place now. As horrible as that sounds, they were in a great place. But if that was going to happen, at least they are now in a better place. So I'm going to go. I thank you guys so much for being here. I will be back in about 35, 40 minutes. And I just have some stuff to get off of my mind. So this was somber Susie. Might be a little spicy Susie next time. So I love you guys. Thank you so much. And I hope to see you back at 8 Central. Love you. Thank you very much.
Hope you enjoyed the show. So glad you were here. We meet here most days. We're but first coffee and you're welcome here. We talk about hard subjects, but we also laugh a lot. If you have a loss or win, we will cheer for you. We're but first coffee and you are safe here. So hit those like and subscribe buttons, notifications set to all. You don't want to miss a show, because this is your home to y'all. So hit those like and subscribe buttons, notifications set to all. You don't want to miss a show, because this is your home to y'all. So hit those like and subscribe buttons, notifications set to all.